Welcome back, everybody. Of course, you know me. My name is Dr. Keith McNally, and this is the Envision Speaker Series. I am here with John Neral, Angel Diaz, and LaTonya Jackson, and we're going to go deep into workplace toxicity. This is the topic for today. But before we get into the topic, I want to allow my guests who are here at the virtual table to kind of introduce themselves and really give us some insight as to what gets them here and what value they're going to give to you today. So let me start with LaTonya. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Dr. LaTonya Jackson here, and I am a leadership and career coach, and I have been since 2016. I work as a VP in an organization, and I get the privilege of helping career professionals grow forward in their careers by finding their flex, finding what their purpose is, and helping them to move forward in that journey.
Love that. Angel, welcome to the episode. Please tell us who you are and what gets you here today.
Yeah, you bet. Angel Diaz, I'm working out of Colorado Springs. I've been an executive leadership coach for the last 10 years. Before that, I was in the Air Force for 24 years. Retired as a colonel, but found my calling here doing executive coaching. Worked across the board with middle managers, executive leaders, and I've been on the receiving end of a toxic work environment, but I've also worked with a lot of people that had to deal with this issue as well. So pleasure to be here today.
Well, before I go any further, I do have to say thank you for your service. And as a fellow Marine here, I do appreciate your service to our country. John, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is John Neral. I help mid-career professionals who feel stuck, undervalued, and underutilized show up to find a job they love or love the job they have. And I'm here today because I never want to see or hear about another mid-career professional who is feeling stuck, undervalued, and underutilized. And like you, there were times in my career where I was exactly that. That was in part due to some toxic work environments and some toxic work cultures. And I'm looking forward to adding to the conversation today to help people navigate out of that and into something that is far more fulfilling and meaningful for them.
John, that sounds like you're a podcast host at heart. And so there must be something behind all of that, but we're going to get into that in just a bit. So I want to introduce the idea of workplace toxicity, but I have very limited experience in that. I've only worked for one place, and that was out in California, and that was quite some time ago, that really treated their employees almost we were being bullied. And so given that experience, and it was all virtual for me, it was like a work from home and a work from home situation. But even in that virtual space, I'm seeing even me, and I'm seeing my colleagues being bullied. So I said, forget this, and I just quit within 2 to 3 weeks because um, I'm worth more than that. But let's get into that conversation. So where do we want to start? Who wants to start this conversation? And how do we define what a workplace toxicity is? John, you give us some heads up.
Yeah, I'll start us off. So I define workplace toxicity as some type of stressor or influencer in the organization, be it from a particular person or group of people that are inflicting some kind of stress into the situation that may ultimately impede your career progression within the organization. So I often think about both with the work with my clients and also in my own career path is that sometimes there are organizational cultures where, let's say, for example, feedback is not readily or easily given. Or it could be even something more severe where certain people are being held back from promotion or given opportunities or things. Or, companies, let's say, don't even have employee resource groups where people can come and freely meet and discuss certain things. So workplace toxicity can take on a lot of different definitions based on examples. But ultimately, if you are feeling in some way, shape, or form that you are being marginalized, held back, stressed out, burned out for whatever reason, the likelihood is probably due to some workplace toxicity.
Now, that really, prompts some questions here. Of course, I'm the question guy, and that's another series altogether.
That's why we
Um,
like you.
so you said being held back, and I never really thought about that as being part of the toxic workplace. I get the whole idea, being under lots of stress or maybe even being bullied, and a lot of the contextual elements to say, I'm not really being valued here for either just being human or what I bring to the table in terms of my work. And so can you talk to me a little bit more about that whole idea of not being promoted, or how did you put that?
Yeah. So for example, if someone were to find out that they were, let's say they're not being given same opportunities as their colleagues, or they're not given opportunities to build their own professional development, right? So, for example, I'm just going to throw out some names here, but Sheila in accounting, no offense to any Sheilas in accounting, Sheila in accounting is able to go to a conference, and that conference costs $4,000 with everything involved. But Miriam over in project management doesn't get that same opportunity. Well, why? Like, what is it? Like, what is the reason behind that? And so people will look at situations like that and going, well, if something isn't equitable for everybody, does that create some toxicity in the workplace? So if everybody is given a certain dollar amount for professional development, that should be given to everybody. If it's not, is that contributing in some way to a toxic workplace environment or culture that may be holding somebody back from bettering themselves in some way, shape, or form?
John, I never really thought about it like that before, but that does make sense. Now, I want you to hold your thoughts. I want to go to your colleagues to kind of get their insight into how we're defining workplace toxicity. Can I get to LaTonya? LaTonya, how do you see this? What is your framework when you think about workplace toxicities?
I think that I agree with what John stated, certainly. And I look at it as toxic people lead to toxic teams, which lead to toxic cultures, right? So when you have individuals in an organization who are unhappy, who are bullying, who are stressed out, burned out, then that they, in essence, will show up in a way that doesn't allow for the culture or the environment to be one where people want to come to work every day. It is a place where they dread the Monday, right? It's the place where, and especially if there's a toxic leader in that environment, they don't look forward to doing the work. They're demotivated, they have poor attitudes, and they don't feel supported in any way. And as a result of that, then that's going to spew out into the work that they're doing. It's going to hinder productivity, employee engagement, all of those other factors that come into play. And so, completely agree with what John is saying and would just like to add those additional components as it relates to workplace toxicity.
So I'm hearing you say, in addition to what John has already said, that this actually affects people's thinking, their behavior, their
Yes,
emotions. Am I on target here?
absolutely. It affects all of it. And when we're stressed, right, it's hard for us to self-regulate. It's hard for us. We may emote more or less depending upon our natural tendencies, and that affects our engagement. So yes, all of the above.
I appreciate that. Let's go to Angel real quick. How do you see, or how do you define what a toxic workplace looks like?
Well, I mean, what John said was important, that aspect of having control or feeling that you're in control. So the way I would define it, and the way I've seen it defined, is that I'm being either micromanaged by a boss. I'm not giving responsibility for a job I know I can do, and that leads to this kind of dip in morale, quite frankly, because people are hired to do a job, they're not allowed to do it, and oftentimes it is a boss or a single person that is causing that. So talk about a toxic environment. It could be yelling or abusive, but oftentimes what I've seen is just a lack of trust. You have an insecure boss that doesn't trust the folks under him or her, and this leads to this drop in morale and people wanting to leave. So I would say the more trust is built between a direct report and a boss, the less chance you're going to have in this environment being toxic. And it's so important to have that foundation of, you know what, I've assessed that you can do the job. I trust that you can do the job. And so I end up working with a lot of bosses that have a little trouble letting go, right? And it leads to not only people getting demoralized, but people leaving. I mean,
So can we take this conversation in a circular format? So I want to go from the top down because I think what you said, Angel, it's starting with leadership, and John mentioned culture, but then LaTonya was focused on how it's impacting the person. So I would like to take that spiral going down and then really see how we can, as the individual who is in this situation, can make heads or tails of what's to do. Does that sound like a good idea?
Yeah,
Sure.
that's great.
Yeah.
So Angel, can we start with you? Because you had mentioned it. So what does this look like from the leadership perspective? And how does that leader really influence the toxicity within a work environment?
yeah, well, the old saying, Keith. People rarely quit the job; they quit the boss. Right? This is, and it's true, and I've seen it so many times where a company culture might be good, but it's one section or one aspect of a company where we have a toxic boss, like LaTonya mentioned, that is causing this. So that's one aspect from the boss's point of view to identify, hey, am I doing the right thing? Are people happy? This is where this idea of quarterly check-ins or bi-monthly check-ins is so important. Where companies are starting to do it more and more. And what I mean by that is not a tactical how is this project going kind of check-in. It's more of a, hey, let's sit down, let's talk about how you're doing, let's talk about your aspirations, and let's talk about what I can do to help you with. That's a very different conversation than, hey, how's this project going? What do you need to complete this task? So by just having those conversations on the calendar on a regular basis, that shows the employee that, hey, I'm interested in your development. I'm interested in supporting you. That's one of the ways to kind of combat this. You know what? It's very busy and we need to get stuff done. Really, really important to take a step back in order not to burn people out and to have the boss show them as the leader, hey, I know we need to get things done, but I'm also interested in you and your development and what you need from me.
So in your expertise, Angel, how do you see that playing out? What does that conversation look like? Can you give us some insight?
You bet. Okay, so when somebody walks into a new environment, right, and one of the things I deal with is someone changing jobs or going into a new position. And one of the things that really had an impact on me when I was a young leader was a leader that came into my organization and he said, I need to talk to you. You're one of my leaders. Get on my calendar next week. And I need you to think about these 3 questions before you come in. And I said, okay, what are they? And he said, I want you to first think about what your aspirations are. Right? So the first question is, what are your aspirations? Second question is, what are your challenges in the job that you're doing? And the third question was, what can I do as a leader to help you with those first 2? Right? What can I do to help you with your aspirations? What can I do to help you with the challenges that you have? Right? So in other words, at that point, he gave me permission to kind of complain. Right? That second question, as far as what my challenges were, was basically giving me carte blanche to say, hey, things aren't right here. I don't have the resources I need, but you're asking me, so I'm telling you, right? And when otherwise I would not have said anything, right? This is my new boss. I'm not going to go in and start complaining about it, but he gave me an opportunity to do this. And I share that with clients because it had such an impact on me, because for that leader, I crossed over from being compliant to him, right? Because he was the boss, so he had to do what he said. And I crossed over into commitment to him, right? Because that boss took the time and wanted to know what I was about, right? What my aspirations were. So if I have any advice to kind of combat this environment, to make a better environment, show interest, genuine, sincere interest in your people, right? And if you do that, it'll get reciprocated. Showing that, asking those questions, I left that room, was like, wow, you know what? I've been in the business for 8 years. No one ever asked me that. But again, it turned out to be one of the best bosses that I had, and that was just the kind of the precursor of what kind of boss and leader that he was going to be.
And it sounds like when a leader steps in and creates the right type of culture where people can actually air their frustrations and air their concerns, things begin to take a different shape. John or LaTonya, can you kind of step into that and talk about what that culture um, looks like when we're trying to fix or create a culture that is toxic and we're trying to make it better? How does that work?
LaTonya, would you mind going first?
Sure,
Okay.
absolutely. So I think it's interesting, right? When you're trying to create a culture that is less toxic, that is one of accountability or a culture of respect, in a lot of ways. It just depends on what your aim or goal is. I think then there has to be some trust and confidentiality, some consistent standards in the organization around how you do that, right? So one leader coming in, as I want to say Angel said, and I was just like, as he said that, a leader coming in, and it's interesting because I had a very different perspective, right? I think when a culture is toxic and someone asks me what my challenges are or what my aspirations are, I may not be able to answer, right? Because I'm so frustrated, I'm so stressed out as an individual. Or I've never been asked the question before and I actually haven't thought about it, right? So you create actually more stress in some instances. You can. I'm not saying what he's saying is incorrect. I'm just saying, dependent upon the lens that the individual brings to that conversation, they may see it as an opportunity to share and they have ideas already, or it could actually put them back and it create more stress and more like, I don't know what the challenges are. I don't know what I want to do with my life, right? So then it just adds fuel to this fire. And now they're thinking, oh, now I've shown up poorly to this new leader. So I think you have to strike a balance of what works for the individual and then what works for the greater culture, right? And so I think in that, yeah, that shift from compliance to commitment, it may take time as a leader. And that's something that I work with leaders on a lot is like, it may take time to make that shift, to ask, and you may have to ask the first time and make it okay to say, I don't know, so that they're willing to come back when they actually do know the answer to the question or series of questions. And then they're able to offer that feedback in a way that doesn't make them put them on the defensive, furthering that toxicity in that environment. So that creates then a level of accountability with the leader that says, hey, I want to hold you accountable for having me come back and answer this, but I'm also going to hold myself accountable to that. That creates that opportunity for awareness in an individual in that environment to help them recognize that perhaps they are toxic because they may not realize it until that question is asked.
Yeah.
Wow. That went deep.
It,
I'm glad
yeah.
you're here for the conversation. John, can you add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the thing here is that when we hear the word toxic or toxicity, it's a word that we can very easily throw out there and expect to just walk away after we've done it. What I want to offer everybody today is that if you are working with a leader or you're having a conversation with somebody and you feel comfortable enough to say, this work situation is toxic or you're toxic, to back that up with an evidence-based statement to give greater context around exactly why you are feeling, experiencing, or processing that toxicity. So if the other person is open enough to hearing it, there can be room for growth there. Now, that being said, that cannot happen unless trust is evident. Both parties need to be able to trust. And one of my favorite quotes about trust and defining what it is comes from a renowned sports psychologist named Dr. Dean Hinnitz, who says, trust is repeated behavior over time. World-class athletes get to trust their game because they have proven both in training and in competition that is how they're going to perform. Well, the same thing holds true in our organizations. We either have trust in our organization and our leaders, or we don't, because they have shown themselves to us in a certain way. It goes back to our brand and what that brand is. Jeff Bezos says our brand is what people say about us when we're not in the room. Right. So if we're going to call somebody out for a toxic trait, behavior, or action, make sure that we take time to really pause and clarify it with an evidence-based statement so we can have a much more intentional conversation around it.
John, for those who are watching and listening, can you repeat that again, please? Trust is
repeated behavior over time.
Now I've got to ask, what does that look like in application? Can I ask that question?
Yeah. I can share with everybody that I was working with a leader who prided themselves on that they had an open door policy, that anybody could come by and stop in and talk to them and everything like that. And this happened to be someplace where I was working and I was directly supporting them. And I said to them one day, and I said, you know, I think it's with really great intentions that you have this open door policy. It's just a shame that's never true.
What?
And they said, excuse me. And I go, nobody can trust you because you're never available.
Oh my.
And she got super defensive. And I said, no, wait a minute. I said, look, you're a victim of a circumstance. And the circumstance is you are pulled in way too many directions. And your heart is really, really big. You want to be there for everybody, but you can't. And so you have best intentions of answering that email, but within the hour, you've had 50 or so emails come through, and that email you wanted to answer is now somewhere outside of your screen on your inbox. It's not that you don't want to, you just can't.
Wow.
And so how does the team build trust with you when your intentions are heartfelt and they're really good, but you can't deliver? So part of our work was actually reshifting communication channels and team dynamics to help not punish or victimize this particular leader, but elevate them in a different way that actually supported their success and positive relationship with the team, and that the team understood that they weren't being neglected. They just couldn't be heard or seen because this particular leader was overwhelmed and overloaded.
John, that makes really good sense and very applicable. We could definitely understand how that works. I want to go back to Angel because you know, we started talking about leadership and then we went into culture, but you have these three questions that I know about you, and one of them is things that we can control, or what we can control, what we can influence, and what we can accept. How does that fit into the culture of leadership and the culture of an organization as it applies to toxic workplaces?
That, you know, a lot of source of stress is trying to control things that we absolutely can't. And so when I work with people, I try to get them to see that there's really three categories in a situation where I have them draw these circles, right? There's a circle in the middle, and a circle around that, and then another circle. In the middle is the smallest circle, is the things that we control, absolutely can control. Our work ethic, whether we show up on time, those things that we are in total control are very small area, as a matter of fact. It's the smallest circle. Outside of that is what we can influence, right? A little bigger circle. And what I mean by influence is, hey, you know what? I'm going to give somebody feedback. I'm going to give them advice. I can try to influence a situation by doing those things, but I can't control it. And then everything else, the outer circle and everything else around it, are things that we have to accept. And not, you don't necessarily have to like it, but we have to accept it as these are things I can't control, whether it's the economy or a natural disaster, these things that happen that I don't have any control over. Where we find the stress occurs is where we try to control things that we absolutely have no control over, right? And so when we identify these things, I can control this about my environment, right? Like you, Keith, quitting that job after 2 weeks. Hey, this is not for me, right? This is, I can control that. I can control whether I stay or go. You made the decision to go. Well, some people can't do that, and they've got to adjust. Or in that instance, I often tell people, hey, it might be time to work simultaneously to keep the job you have, but let's start looking around. Because and the question I will always ask people is the situation right now sustainable? Right? Is the situation that you're in, if nothing changes, is this sustainable? And if the answer is no, then we start talking about, okay, what is it about the situation I can control? Once we have that, then we can start making incremental changes to improve the situation. So this is what I mean about identifying that. Once we look at, hey, I could spend all day worrying about this, but I don't have any control over it. So I'm going to direct my energy in a more positive way to make it.
So, LaTonya, how does that fit into your leadership paradigm of helping leaders really create a situation that isn't toxic and really does benefit the people who they are leading so that they can perform their best?
I think that's a great question, Keith. I think as I think about what Angel said about control, I think there's confidence and there's an environment that you have to create around um, a sense of calmness within yourself, right? And I do believe it starts with you, because you can control you, right? You can control what you're thinking, what you believe, and then ultimately how you respond or how you act in any given situation. And that then will help you. This idea of an evidence journal kind of sparked as I was listening to the conversation, right? You can have evidence, right? Because we all sort of create evidence in our mindsets around all the things that are wrong. But could you create an evidence journal that's also what are the things that are right, right? And as you do that, I think then you can you'll have the positive and the things that are wrong, right? But hopefully you'll have more positive, and you'll be able to see that and articulate that as you grow inside your organization. And on Angel's right, there's many reasons why I can't. There's the internal reasons, and then there's the external reasons as to why an environment might be toxic. It may actually have nothing to do with the leader, but it's a reflection of what's happening in my environment that's causing me to show up and react in a way, because we are, as human beings, as we all know, we react emotionally first and then we respond logically, right? And so I may be emotionally reacting to the environment I'm in, not necessarily because of the leader, but because of some other internal stimuli or some other external stimuli that actually has nothing to do with work. And it's sort of this inside out philosophy that I like to talk about, is everywhere you go, there you are, right? So everywhere you go, there you are. If you're at home, if you're feeling stress at work, you're likely feeling the same pressures and stress at home. So everywhere you go, there you are, and it's going to show up. And how does that play? How does that react? Well, we can gain insight into how reactive someone is in a situation, or we can gain insight into how reactive someone is by looking at that reaction and saying, man, that was an overly responsive reaction to this one thing that happened, right? Especially if someone lashes out in anger, and even if you're a new leader, you may not, that's maybe your first encounter, you go, whoa, that's seemingly really harsh, right? That was a harsh response, right? They must not feel in control, right? Or, and as a leader, we almost have to pause in those moments, and instead of matching energy in the in the negative sense in this example, it's pausing enough to control our own energy so that we can logically respond and give the person space and time to come back and course correct. So I hope I'm getting at answering your question there, but hopefully that starts to plant some seeds and ideas around that. But helping people, it's coaching them through, as a leader inside an organization, is coaching them through. But if the leader doesn't know how to do that, many leaders don't, then there's an opportunity to self coach, and to ask yourself, why did I have that reaction so strong? Why did I react so strongly in this moment? What was it about this situation that caused me? And that's why I said sort of an evidence journal. I had this really strong emotion, and I can use myself as an example. I had a really strong reaction to some feedback. It wasn't delivered well. It wasn't. It was toxic. It was, and that leader could own that I just say what I'm thinking, which is not always good for anybody. But in that scenario, they said, I just say what I'm thinking. And they go, but you take feedback well. And I thought to myself, when I hang up this call with you, there's going to be a lot said. Man, it's not that I'm handling it well. It's just in the moment I've learned, right? Learned behavior. I've learned not to react to you, but it doesn't mean I'm not reacting. And it didn't mean I didn't go out and start immediately applying for a job, right? It was just in the moment I knew how to show up to save face. And so you can do that, and that can contribute to the burnout and some of the other things, because those are the hidden emotional reactions and things that people aren't seeing, that leaders aren't seeing, that contribute to that work environment.
LaTonya, as a coach, you said something that I was not familiar with. An evidence journal. That's what you said, right?
Yes.
What
Yes.
is that? And you said you framed it in the things that are good and the things that are bad. Can you clarify some of that?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that when I was talking with someone recently, they were in a situation and they were trying to figure out what to do and how to make a decision. And so it's actually their idea, but I told them I was going to adopt it. I gave them credit once, and now it's mine. Um, but thank you, client, and they know who they are. But in that, the way that the evidence journal works is essentially you take a moment, really at the end of the day is what I recommend to clients, right? It's after you've had the day. Some people prefer to do it in the morning, but you take that and you write out what at what worked well, what didn't work well, as evidenced by. So going back to what John said, you got to have that statement at the end of it, as evidenced by what happened that made it good, or what happened that made it bad, what happened that made you react one way or the other, positively or negatively in the situation. And as you do that over time, one, you're not holding all of that in. So it's kind of a purposeful thing, right? You're not holding all of those emotions in, but you're also able to go back and reflect on what are my strengths. When this happens, it helps you to recognize those moments where when this happens, I tend to do X, right? You might not be able to articulate it initially, but by keeping an evidence journal over time, you will be able to.
I appreciate that. So I want to move into the idea that we can kind of transition a toxic workplace into a non-toxic workplace. Is that even possible? Um, given leaders, given leadership, given culture, given what's already been established, or am I just thinking ideally? The floor is open. John, Angel, LaTonya, can we transition a toxic workplace into a non-toxic workplace? And is that even the right word to say? Do we want to even say a healthy workplace, or what do we want to call it?
Yeah, I think healthy workplace is good. I think non-toxic is also appropriate in this regard. And I think there's absolutely nothing wrong in being very idealistic that it is absolutely possible for that to happen. Human beings are dynamic, and there's a lot of things and factors in play. But in my experience, Keith, and everybody, like the challenge here is understanding what the root cause is of the toxicity. Is it an organizational culture dynamic in terms of how people are spoken to, how feedback is given and received? Transparency does not mean toxicity. Being transparent doesn't mean I'm just going to tell you what I'm feeling, because no, you need to put a filter on. You need to change the way you're thinking about that. Otherwise, we're all going to end up in HR. So we have to kind of be careful with that too. But it has to come from above. Somebody has to start that conversation. And LaTonya, what you said about how it starts with you could not ring truer in this case. We are all responsible for the level of toxicity we bring or we don't bring into the workplace.
Ooh, explain that, please.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to, you know, how we show up and handle things. I could work for a toxic environment, but my team is healthy. My team knows how to have productive conversations. We set ground rules and norms, and we do the work around what we do to protect our team within our walls of our team dynamic, because this is the way we choose to function. I worked in one organization where one of the norms we had in our meetings was we will use respectful tone at all times. And when we had a new person join the team and we walked through the norms with them, and they said, "Can you tell me what that means?" And the whole team kind of looked at each other and we were like, yeah, that's a great question, because we shouldn't assume everybody knows what that means. And I said, would someone like to give an example? And they said, yeah, don't ever call me an idiot in a meeting. And they went, oh, got it. Okay, we're good.
Wow.
Right. So so you can protect as much as possible what you, like Angel was saying, like what you have control over. If you have a team and you're responsible for that team, you can be the one thing in that organization that is free from that toxicity, because that's the way you choose to show up and lead.
I think it's an important point when we talk about the leaders setting the climate, right? I mean, it off of you and what you say and how you act. And it's so important to clarify that maybe there are assumptions being made as to maybe people bring different lenses to what civility looks like in an environment. And I would encourage people to quantify that. What does that mean? Not only, hey, don't call me an idiot, but this idea of using a respectful tone. People may need examples, because assuming people know what that is might be a mistake. But absolutely, the leader sets the tone for that. And I always encourage leaders, when they're going to a new environment or when somebody comes in, verbalize that. Don't assume. Verbalize what your expectation is. Once you set the expectation and people deviate from that, then we can go back. But without it being set initially, it becomes tougher to correct people after the fact.
Yeah.
I agree. I think to add to the conversation, you know, defining what leadership means. Leadership, everybody in my team is a leader, because leadership, as John Maxwell defined it, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And I abide by that principle. And so by being able to articulate that to my team, that means that every one of you is a leader. My job as the person that you report to is to remove roadblocks and obstacles and ensure you have the skills and knowledge to do your job well and effectively and meet the expectations and goals that have been established. When that's unclear for people in an organization, that inconsistency, you know, that leads to inconsistent standards. It leads to people fearing consequences that may or may not be real in an organization. So there's all sorts of other things that can come out when the definition of terms around what is it that we are agreeing to, and how we define leadership in that organization is held across the organization. And so that's one of the things I think that would add to what they're saying is it is the leader sets the tone. It is clarifying roles and responsibilities. It is establishing those rules of engagement. I was part of a team once where we were dysfunctional. And so we went through Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team. We were all red when we started the journey, all red on every level, accountability, trust, the whole nine. And I literally didn't think it was possible, but I will tell you, I am still connected to that group of people today, because we did the work to shift from being that toxic team to becoming a team that still today, if I reached out to any one of them, I could get help and resources or pointed in a direction if I needed to. That you can shift it, you can change it, but you got to be willing to do the work. And part of that for us was establishing rules of engagement. People were upset because in the mornings, I had a toddler at the time. When I got to the office, the only thing I wanted to do was get food. So I would put my stuff down and go get a muffin and some water. And then I had meetings immediately starting the rest of the day. Well, that message was as simple. It was people thought that I didn't want to invite them to breakfast because I'd simply come in and I would just go downstairs. I thought, that is the craziest thing ever. But when I understood their perspective and their lens, and I took the time, right? We took the time as a team to kind of walk through these issues. Then and only then did I was like, hey, here's what I'll commit to doing. Going back to commitment. I can control how I show up when I come in the office. So in the elevator ride up, I would pause and I would say, don't forget to ask if they want to go to breakfast with you, if they just want to walk downstairs. It was as simple as that. That is the power of shifting a culture. And literally, it changed the whole dynamic for all the people who thought I was being rude or whatever. They don't think that anymore, but whatever they were thinking at that time, right? It was negative, it was toxic. But I had 11 projects that were all active, they were all highly visible. When they understood that, they were like, how can we help you? You've got too much on your plate. They only had 1 or 2 projects each, right? So there's a lot of factors, and goes to the levers that we're pulling in an organization that contribute to it. But the individual does have that sense of control, but the leader does have responsibility to set that tone and define leadership for everybody in the organization and how they'll be held to those standards and accountability.
So in this conversation, we've talked about leadership, we've talked about accountability, we've talked about showing up, and we've talked about self-awareness. With the amount of time that we have left, I want each of you to consider how a leader can show up being self-aware and then allow their workplace, their team, whatever that looks like, whoever they are responsible for, tell our audience, the leaders in our audience, the leaders listening to you, the experts today, what they can do, what they need to do to reflect on how they are shaping, forming the environment in which people are working and create a better environment. Give them something to do today, please. I don't care who goes first.
I'll go first because LaTonya just that example with the breakfast, so important that her leaders had the courage to give her feedback. Right, this is feedback that they wanted to give, and hey, you're doing that action, and it makes it seem like this when it totally was not that, right? And so I would say, as a leader, finding a way to give feedback. Now, I'm talking as a leader to a direct report, or if you're a direct report to your leader to change an environment. Finding a way, an effective way to do that. And I will tell you that I learned this a way of giving feedback in such a way as people feel supported and non-defensive. So it's very quickly SBI. The S is for situation, and the situation is grounded in time and place. And I'll go through an example very quickly. And the B is a behavior. Behavior, an objective, as if you were filming with your phone a behavior and not inferring any intent or anything else. And then finally, the I is the impact, and the impact is on you. What impact that behavior had on you. Quick example. Yes, last Tuesday at the 2 p.m. staff meeting, I was giving a presentation and you had your head in your phone the entire time. You never looked up, right? So the situation was the meeting. The behavior that I described as I'm giving feedback to a person is that he had his head down in his phone the entire time. And the impact of that behavior on me is that I felt that what I had to say wasn't important to you. Now, we're giving feedback to that person. Each section is undeniable. Ideally, the time and the place, yes, I agree with that. The behavior, yes, I did have my head down the entire time. Also inarguable. And finally, the impact is on you. Again, inarguable. No one's going to argue with how that impacted you. We do that to create an awareness that, you know what, they might not have known that my behavior of putting my head down on that phone, I didn't know how that would affect other people. And then we can have a conversation about why that was, and hey, maybe changing that. So I give that to you. I learned it about 8 years ago. SBI, situation, behavior, impact, as a way to give feedback to someone where they feel supported and feel like at the end, hey, I appreciate you telling me that. Right? Very similar to that situation with LaTonya. Somebody finally said something. My gosh, this is the way she's coming across. Well, that was an impact on them, And she changed the behavior or improved the behavior because of it, right? So I encourage leaders up and down, to your leaders, to your subordinates, learn how to give feedback.
Who's next?
I'll go. The thing that I would offer anyone listening today is that you need to have a critical friend at work or in your industry who is someone who is going to tell you the things you need to hear versus what you want to hear. We all want to be praised. We all want to be told we're doing a good job. We all want to be told we're right. But having a critical friend who is going to be that person for you to give you information you need, to challenge you, to get you to consider, to help increase your self-awareness, or to even give you some self-awareness, that critical friend can be extremely instrumental in terms of reshaping and redefining who you are as a leader and make a far greater impact than you are doing right now.
Thank you. LaTonya?
I love this, right? Creating awareness. I am all about creating awareness. Awareness is the first step toward change, whether that's, and it starts with an individual, it starts with you. And so as a leader, you got to be aware of what are the areas that energize you and what are the things that demotivate you, because that is going to influence how you show up. If you're about to enter that meeting, with, 10 leaders, and that one leader is always the one who's going to give you that feedback, and they're just going to straight shoot it, and they're not going to mince their words, and it's going to feel like they're attacking you, you're not going to look forward to that meeting, right? But if you know that already and you are aware of it, how can you prepare yourself for that type of situation so that you don't become toxic because someone else is toxic in the organization? And that requires you then to look out and identify those areas that energize you, identify those areas that are your strengths, and then leverage those to overcome those barriers that will help you stay out of an environment, or stay out of creating toxicity within yourself, so that you don't create an environment of toxicity for others. And that, I think, is as important as anything else that we could that we've offered here today, is in addition to creating the awareness, it's making sure you're aware for yourself of what works for you, what motivates you, so that you can then serve others in that way.
There's no better way to end this conversation. LaTonya, thank you. John, Angel, LaTonya, thank you for joining me in conversation. For those of you who are watching or listening, this has been another edition of the Envision Speaker Series, and I'll see you next time. Take care.